Hi, and welcome to the pop-up podcast, Dear Future CRO, brought to you by Hunters and Unicorns and GrowthQ. Hosted by Culture Crunch and, of course, GrowthQ. We talk about leadership and its key pillars, including mentorship, sponsorship, and diversity. Today, Esther and I are thrilled to be joined by a formidable guest, Elaine Mason, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Innovation at Cisco. Elaine, welcome.
Thank you. I love your introduction and I love the topic. This is going to be an exciting conversation.
We're definitely very, very excited. Now, obviously, I have been enamored for many years of your diverse career, and not just diverse by company, but also by experience and expertise and like job title. What in the world? So, Elaine, can you talk to us about your diverse career journey along your career?
Sure. I usually joke and say my career is basically a process of elimination. I'll talk. I'm actually in what I'd say is the fourth chapter of my career. So I've had four entirely different kind of lines of work, and I've been in probably 7 or 8 different industries. So I started my career as an undergraduate in political science. I swore I was going to become a lawyer or a politician or someone who was going to change the world. So my first chapter was in the Change the World chapter, the public sector Change the World chapter. So I worked both for a senator and wrote legislation, and then worked for a nonprofit doing lobbying and a host of other activities. I actually ended up leaving that chapter unexpectedly, where a grant that was funding my role was stopped, and fell into my second chapter, which was technology and specifically technical support. So running call centers, running desktop support, running technical training for an entertainment company. And that chapter lasted almost a decade. And what I found halfway through that chapter, which is relevant for this conversation, was that I loved my nights and weekends job, which was growing and developing my team, helping people figure out how to be great leaders, and helping set up the team so it was as effective as it could possibly be, but not dragging people like into the ground. And when you work in a call center or a high turnover environment, finding a way to make that work sustainable is an imperative. I did that work for, like I said, close to a decade, and the company I was working at the time chose to outsource the function. So I helped outsource the function, and then I actually resigned. And the head of human resources said no. And they created this job for me, which was a transformative job, which helped me. It was a bridge between chapter 2 and chapter 3, where I actually worked for the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, and the CHRO, the Chief Human Resources Officer, and pivoted into human resources for about a 15-year chapter, focused on almost every step I could have been in human resources. I played most every base with the exception of total rewards. And then ultimately started having that same feeling I had when I was in call centers, going, the nights and weekends job I love to do is to think about how do you actually introduce purpose into companies, purpose into people, making sure that the work they're doing has real meaning for them. And ended up falling into an opportunity where I could help a very large company, Cisco, build out their strategy toward what they mean, what as a company, how do you drive purpose, and how do you enable each person within that organization to achieve their purpose? So I'm in this strange title of strategy and innovation, where we're building out a strategy for the company to achieve its purpose. And then the innovation piece is, quite frankly, purpose is so new at a lot of companies, there's a lot of experimentation. And I have the privilege of running a team that basically is experimenting with how do you integrate purpose into how we do our work. And that's chapter number 4, and that's where I am today.
Wow, it's so interesting. The way I like how you broke down those 4 chapters, because it's just, understanding the steps that you took to get to where you are now is so interesting. And I think lots of senior individuals in leadership roles, just like you, Elaine, they often say actually when they started off, they didn't think that they would be in this particular place now, right? It's so interesting to hear that. I mean, just on that point, what would you say your best practices for career growth are?
It's changed over my career. For the earlier half of my career, I would pick up anything that someone threw down. So, oh, you don't want to do that? I'll take care of it. And I think as a woman, over time, I realized that wasn't actually the reputation I wanted to have. So because what happens is you then truly become the mop-up person. Anyone makes a mistake, you mop it up, but it isn't always the most satisfying jobs. So here's what I'd usually do. I'd usually look for, what am I curious about? What do I want to learn? And what scares me a little. And when I'd hear about an opportunity, if I was curious about it, like, I don't have an answer of how I'd do that, or God, I've always wanted to learn how to do that, or it's wow, that's giving me a flutter in my chest in a kind of a good but scary way, I would usually jump on it. If it's something where I was given an opportunity or saw an opportunity where it was a rerun, it's, I've seen this, I've done this, I know how to do this. That is usually a reason why I wouldn't go for a job, or wouldn't go for an opportunity. And I know that seems very counterintuitive, but I do think there's always red threads in someone's career, and one red thread in my career is lifelong learner. I love to learn, and I get bored easily. So for me, that using curiosity as a driver of my career has been incredibly powerful because it's keeping me in that learning space.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So true. When you said, I go after what makes me curious, where I can see I can learn, and what gives me butterflies and makes me nervous, I literally got chills because think about, the most growth comes from when you're open to learn, or what's that thing that says, um, be brave enough to suck at something. Yeah. Because
Yes.
you've done it
And
for the
I'm
first
really good
time.
at failing. I'm like a pro at failing. In fact, anytime I've started leading teams, and I was lucky that I started leading teams early in my career, I will usually tell my team, or give kind of not a speech, but I'll start my team with a team meeting probably early on in the first month. And I'll say, so here's some expectations. And most people, kind of sit back and kind of start taking notes. I'm like, we're going to fail. We're going to fail big and ugly. It's going to be absolutely terrifying when it happens. And here's the deal. We have to learn from it, and we have to not repeat it. As long as we learn from it and not repeat it, I got our backs. But if we don't learn from it and we just make it a rerun, then I don't think we're actually benefiting from the failure. But Esther, you're right. You have to be comfortable with jumping in and failing. It's one of the reasons I'm most excited in my current role to have this kind of experimentation or innovation group, because quite frankly, we're going to fail a ton and we're going to learn a ton.
Yeah. Oh my God. What a message for leaders, right? Like, as a leader, have your team's back. Walk in. We are going to be the most professional failures you've ever seen. We're going to learn and we're going to not repeat it. Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So, what do you feel like has been, if you look across your career, what outside of the leaning to learn, what did you, if you look across that career, what did you take from that and continue to learn that now you feel like is the kind of base for going into this role that you're in now?
It's a great question. It's actually a really hard one because if you look on paper, this career makes no sense. This is a non-linear. Everyone who ever asks me for a career path or prescription, how to get to the seat I'm in, I'm like, I couldn't tell you. This is completely not that. But there are some building blocks that are actually things that I've taken with me and continued the whole time. The first one is around change management, where, think about it. I started and I was doing lobbying, changing people's minds. So first work I did, first chapter was all how to change people's minds, how to set up structures to enable change. The second thing I was doing in tech was teaching people how to use things they hadn't used before. This was early in technology. Scary to say, but in the 1990s, early 2000 technology, people were not tech native at the time. And it was change management. How do you get people over the fear of working through technology they've never seen before? The third one in human resources, that change management in human resources is almost embedded. How do you get people to find themselves in the culture they're in what's expected from a learning perspective, what's expected from a leadership perspective? And then now in the purpose space, what companies do we know that are driven by purpose? There's a huge change management thread there. How do you bring people along on that journey? So change management is probably unintentionally the biggest thread that's run through my whole career. The second thread that's run through my whole career has been about customer centricity. And it's been about putting yourself in the seat of the person to which you're serving or supporting. And so in the political space, my first chapter, it was all putting myself in the seat of constituents. In the second space, when I was in technology, it was all about this person, when they're calling your team, is in dire straits. They're in fear. How do you help them depressurize so they can be able to hear you if you're trying to instruct them to get out of whatever technical mess they're in? In human resources, it's really about people don't typically go to human resources when everything's jolly and good. They usually go to human resources when something is traumatic. That's the reason why human resources is the punchline on every single sitcom. And then in the purpose space right now, it's really about how do you think about the purpose at Cisco is powering an inclusive future for all. That means we have to put our feet in the seat of inclusive and future for all. And that's a really important thread that started early in my career that I've taken on through, regardless of the different seats, the different industries, the different roles that I've sat in.
Do you think it was a conscious, at any point, do you think it was a conscious kind of move on your part to really excel in the change management piece? Or do you think, I guess I'm interested to know how intentional that was.
Yeah. So first decade, absolutely, without a doubt, not intentional at all. Fell into it. I actually mid-career or in my 30s, I actually went back to school and got my master's in organization development. And I specifically went for that degree because it is about how do people and organizations develop, and it is entirely about change. And what I used to joke about was that essentially before I got my master's in OD, I was practicing without a license. That's usually the term I used to use. So it's like I was driving without a license, but I was instinctually doing kind of what I now can label as change management or org development practices. But I did choicefully go back saying, I want to understand the theory. I want to understand if my instinct is right. I want to understand what are the things I don't know about to make myself even better at it. And learned a tremendous amount about personal change, about the change of teams and organizations, because we do, although, all of us start in our first team as our family when we were growing up in whatever construction that was in. And you think about how does that family and how do you take change forward in that regime? The same thing happens at work. So I really learned about that and then got much better at my job when I got my license.
I love that. Elaine, as you know, we are incredibly passionate about the concept of mentorship and career development, and it spans any career. And obviously here we're talking specifically to revenue leaders and those in sales or business development go-to-market roles. Can you talk to us about the role mentorship has played along that career journey for you personally?
Sure. So I've had a lot of mentors, some of which were constructed like through a program, and some of which I just ended up building those relationships with people. And just to set the stage, I do look at mentorship, advocacy, and sponsorship as three different things. Where I look at mentorship as a place where someone can really give you shared knowledge, a safe space to go to learn, someone that can give you really advisory support. And I've had both mentors where someone was more senior to me. I've had mentors when people were more junior to me. I have mentors when it was peer-to-peer. And I've gotten that experience from all three. Then I look at advocates, and those are people that know you and through work can actually talk about your work. And that means they can kind of, they don't necessarily need to put their reputation in the game for you, but they can speak on behalf of knowing you and knowing what you're capable of doing. And then I look at sponsors as people that put their skin in the game for you. They're willing to put their reputation on the line for you. And those are the people that really pull you into new jobs. People that are willing to take bets on you in a very material way where they're putting their own brand, their own position, their own political capital at risk. So mentors started for me actually at a very early, first chapter of my career where I had a social worker that I was working with at one of the nonprofits I was working in, just sharing with me at first how they balanced some of the challenges of working at that nonprofit. And I started just learning from them. And we built this safe space that when I was having a problem with a client or when I was having a problem with a leader at the organization, they were my safe space to go. And we had kind of this informal mentorship. When I was in my second chapter, when I was in technology, we actually had a very formal mentoring program at the organization, and it was in the entertainment sector. So I was being mentored by somebody who's running like a large-scale production studio. And I was learning how to, quite frankly, I was struggling with navigating politics of a large company. And they kind of walked me through, and every time I had a challenge where I was, quite frankly, stumbling over myself, I would ask them for like 30 minutes and just say, this is what's going on. And they would listen. They would share their experience, which was profoundly valuable, and they would give me some tips or advice. And what that did for me was created, I mean, they were in a completely different line of work, but it created this hugely safe space for me to learn and really grow. And quite frankly, some of the best advice I'd ever gotten. And then actually, when I switched into human resources, when I started being in dual or peered mentoring, where we were really kind of giving ourselves that psychological safety within the construct of the human resources org. And so it's really been my whole way through. Very rarely has a mentor directed me or given me coaching that failed. Usually, I mean, most people, when you're not emotionally involved with something, you can usually give some really good advice based on your experience. And quite frankly, it always put me in a space where, again, going back to that willingness to fail, I felt like I was in a safe enough community, or I created a safe enough place for myself that I was willing to kind of take leaps where I needed to.
I think the way in which you differentiated the mentor, then the advocate, and the sponsor is really, really insightful, because it really gives those crisp parameters into the differences are. We know that they're all incredibly helpful and reap benefits, but to actually be able to categorize them in such a clean way, I think is great. In your opinion, Elaine, I mean, obviously you spoke very highly of having a mentor in your own career, but what do you think the real benefits are for the mentor to in that relationship, but also the mentee as well?
Yeah, and I do think I'm glad you asked that. It is a two-way street. So for them, it's funny. I've always this may be a traditional view. So take it as that. But I've always found I always wanted the mentor, the mentee to direct what the conversations would need to be about. But that doesn't mean the mentor doesn't gain huge value. Quite frankly, we all know this, but when you're able to explain a point of view on something, or when you're able to kind of problem solve with someone, you learn as much as the person that may have been asking the question or gave you the problem. So when I've been a mentor, and I'm a mentor right now to around 7 or 8 people that I'm in like an official mentoring capacity, and it's often they will come to me going, "Hey, I'd love to pick your brain on X," and just as a mentor, having the opportunity to kind of get crisp on what I'm thinking and reflect back on my experiences, it actually gives me like secondary learning. And they talk about like multiple learning cycles. Like when you're in something, you're learning, you may not be conscious of it, but when you're rerunning it or when you're applying it to another problem, that's when the learning starts to lock in. So for me, one of the reasons I have a pretty large volume of mentees right now, and I usually have anywhere between 7 to 10 riding at any time, it's really for that experience. It's helping listen, learn, hear about new problems I otherwise may not be experiencing, and then kind of going, how would I problem solve this? How did I do that in the past? And like locking in that learning. And as a consummate learner, that's like super fun for me. So that's what I really do love about being in the mentor space. And in the mentee space, it's the establishing safety and really having that place to go where it isn't quite fail safe, but it is a place where you can kind of pre-assess or pre-wire what may end up being something you end up like learning through or failing from. So, because in advance, it's like, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? And you almost pre-mortem is the phrase that kind of pops in my head. You almost pre-mortem things you're going to do. And just having that space to kind of almost, proactively fail a little bit, proactively figure something out before it goes sideways.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. And selfishly, I have to drop this because Elaine's an incredible mentor for me personally, but also one of our board of advisors for GrowthQ, which we're obviously focused on mentorship specifically for sales professionals, but also making sure we create an equitable career path for them. So. She puts it in. She actually practices what she preaches. I'm
And
evidence
it's a two-way
of that.
street. I learn from Esther every time we talk. Every time. Because she'll bring a problem and I'll be like, I have no idea. Let's figure that out. So it's such a great two-way street relationship. So she's one of my favorites.
Oh, bless you. But you bring up a good point, right? It's the theme is for mentorship, it's two-way, right? It isn't one-way learning, it's two-way learning. And making sure both mentee and mentor show up ready for that learning and for that growth is so critically important. Now, one thing I would love to ask and dig a little bit deeper in is you discussed mentorship you discussed advocates, but then you talked about sponsorship. And if you could maybe dig a little bit deeper in that for us, in because there's advocacy, but there's advocacy in sponsorship. So maybe you can like dig a little bit deeper into that for us.
Yeah, and I think the key and the key in my mind that separates sponsorship from all others is the person's willingness to take potentially what they've advised or partnered with you on to problem solve, mentorship, things they've observed you doing in action at work, which is in my mind advocacy. And then quite frankly, the key is I'm going to put my brand, my skin in the game, my personal reputation based on what I've learned about you and what I've seen of you to help accelerate your career in the direction you choose. And I think that's the key piece of sponsorship in my mind, which is sponsors are an accelerator, usually upward in career, but it could also be if you're trying to make like a full channel turn. So for me, that's the key on sponsorship that I think does separate it. And that requires time. It's one of the things that I've often gotten worried about when I've been coaching someone early in career, that they'll meet me for the first time and go, "Can you be my sponsor?" And I love the hunger, I love the ambition, but my answer is always no, I can't, because I couldn't be a good sponsor for you right now. I don't know your background. I haven't seen you and experienced you at work, so I can't put my personal reputation in the game for you. The other neat thing about sponsors is because they usually have built a relationship with you over time, they know your superpowers. And what's so impressive and important about that is that means a sponsor may be sitting in a room, hear about an opportunity, it may click with them going, "Oh, I know the person's superpowers that can actually do this." And they can actually bring you into a conversation that otherwise you wouldn't have been raised in. And that's what I think is critically important of why a sponsor can be a career accelerator. More than I look at mentoring, largely it's a learning, it's a growth opportunity. It positions you, it amplifies your superpowers, but a sponsor can actually leverage their knowledge of you to dramatically change and accelerate your career. And it's one of the reasons why I usually advise people, do not have one sponsor, like have multiples. Because if you're banking on just one person to put their brand in on you, that is it's the equivalent, and I don't know how many people listening to this have it, but this is the equivalent of keeping $1 or £1 in your pocket, and that's it. And like, yeah, I don't have Apple Pay. I have no credit cards. I just have this single bill. That should be good, right? I can buy anything I want with that. And the answer is no, get your Apple Pay, get 5 credit cards. Like, do your work, get some options so you have career paths in case, you lose the dollar.
Yeah. I think framing it in that way as a sponsor is an accelerator, I think is really, really impactful, because it's exactly that. I mean, I'm not sure how it is kind of stateside, ladies, but certainly within the UK, we're talking about sponsorship. It's something that is becoming a little bit more bedded into, woven into the fabric of our language, but I don't think it's kind of come into fruition as much as it really should have. In your opinion, how can we really drive the normalization of sponsorship? How can it be normalized?
It's a great question. And there's been a ton of studies by Sylvia Ann Hewitt on sponsorship versus mentorship that actually have some really strong plans in place there. So that was me putting my little HR hat on for a split second. But I think it's two things. I actually believe right now there's a lot of sponsorship that happens. It's unstructured. So it's unstructured in organizations, and therefore you don't know you're being sponsored, or someone is unconsciously sponsoring somebody else and not being thoughtful about the choice they've made against who they've sponsored. So I think a piece of it is, quite frankly, there's always a learning component, which is making an organization clear on what it means to sponsor, clear on the responsibility of leaders to be sponsors and to know talent well enough that they can authentically sponsor them. And then I do think it's a little bit of building something programmatic. So you can almost, and this is just my perspective, but I think there's value in tracking and tracing who's sponsoring who. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is there was a phrase when I was in my Master's of OD program that I loved, which was, when you've told one person something, it's a conspiracy. When you've told more, you're now accountable. And if you haven't told anybody but the person you're sponsoring them, that's a nice conspiracy, but it may not actually drive anything. Versus if you have signed on, I'm sponsoring this person, I'm putting my person in, reputationally, they're in my team. You're going to be then accountable. and you're going to think about them and be more accountable for them. So I think it's that combination of those three of everyone understanding the basic language and the importance of it, getting really clear of the conscious role you're taking in being a sponsor, and then tracking it. I think those are some keys that can get an organization to be more gain more out of the sponsorship that's probably already occurring in the organization.
Yes, yes. You bring up a really good point of my next question, which is the advantage leaders have when sponsorship, mentorship, and coaching and peer-to-peer connections are happening within their organization. Can you maybe talk about how leaders, or give the advice to sales leaders, and how they can scale their culture through leadership, or through, excuse me, sponsorship, mentorship, and like you said, really tracking that and making that programmatic. Why I ask you that question, yeah, for leaders, is there's statistics that show that those that have intentional, equitable, and inclusive practices within their organizations see lead to conversion rates at 54% compared to those that don't at around 25%, 26%. And so it's clear as a leader, having equitable practices like mentorship and sponsorship and tracking that will help you sell more stuff. So can you talk a little bit about the benefits outside of selling more to leaders for having those practices within the organization, like mentorship, like sponsorship?
Yeah, so I'll give you two that just are off the top of my head, but we can probably dig in for some more. First is actually, let's think about how long it takes from the time you hire somebody who's in sales to the time that they're productive. And every single time you have turnover in the sales organization, you are actually reducing your full load and ability to actually sell, because they need to understand your product lines, they need to understand your pricing structure, they need to understand your clients, they need to build credibility with your clients. All that takes time. So the goal would be for those people that are in the sales organization that are excellent at their job, you probably want to keep them. One of the best ways you can keep someone is actually building a relationship with them that is beyond did you make your numbers? And if you're building that kind of trusting, connected relationship beyond did you make your numbers, you're going to build trust. That can start with mentorship, and it may be a reason why someone chooses to stay. People tend to leave places they're not attached to. If you don't have personal connection, if you don't feel psychological safety, if you don't feel like people are investing in you, why would you stay? So I think one of the key ways is to avoid attrition of your top salespeople. One way to do it is invest in them as a mentor. The second way to do it is over time, people are going to look for career growth. And one of the strongest ways you can gain career growth is by sponsoring that person in either a rotational job or a stretch assignment or a promotion, what opportunities present themselves. And you can only do that as a sponsor, that you know about that person, you know their superpowers, you can put your skin in the game to give them that opportunity. So when you're in a culture where there is a strong ethos of mentorship, where people feel invested in, and an ethos over time of sponsorship where you can actually move around in the organization and have a longer career, it saves the organization the attrition, the recruitment, the credibility with their customers. All of that gets saved. So there's huge secondary benefits of having a strong mentorship culture and a strong sponsorship culture by retaining your talent. The other piece of this is also, everything doesn't get done through sales enablement. Like, you actually learn how to become a great salesperson by observing or being a partner with somebody who is a great salesperson. So you can get that from your mentor when you're working with them or on a tough client or a product that's just hard to position to sell. Or at the same point, you can gain that from your sponsor, where they see this new line or new way we're structuring a product or the way we're trying to sell it, where they can actually go, oh, you know what? I've done this before. I know you can. I'm going to put you in there and we're going to try it out. So it's not an optional. If you want a culture where your best talent are retained, it's an investment.
Just incredible. So true. So true.
I honestly feel like we could sit here with Elaine for hours and just get all these like nuggets of amazing, insightful information. Yeah, exactly. Um, Esther, why don't you take the last question?
Oh, I will, because I love this one.
I know you do.
I do. Um, as you all know, I've been in this sales and go-to-market game for almost 2 decades, and I always wanted something like this to exist for me when I was, 21 starting out. And I think of that 21-year-old getting ready to start their career, the future CRO, listening to this podcast right now and wanting to hear what they need to prepare their career for where they're going. And so this last question we typically ask everybody. It's almost like an advice love letter to that future CRO. So Elaine Mason, finish this sentence for us. Dear future CRO, and blank, what advice would you give to that person?
Oh gosh, I knew this question was coming and I still don't have the perfect answer. So I'll give you what's top of mind for me. And I tend to try to do things in threes. You've probably noticed that during the podcast. Dear future CRO, first, take bold risks on yourself and others. Second, be careful whose toes you step on today. They may be attached to the person you end up having to kiss tomorrow. And the third is always take each opportunity to learn not only about the technical stuff, but about the individuals and people you're working with. Because ultimately, we're in this game to be with other people, not to be with products or profit.
Oh, my gut. That was incredible. So good. Thank you so much, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. Total fun.
Elaine, thank you so much for your time. It was incredible and just so grateful to be able to sit with you, one of the masters, and just hear from you directly, exactly how you've gotten to where you've gotten, but also where you're going as well, and all the lessons that you've learned to take you there. So on behalf of GrowthQ, Hunters and Unicorns, Culture Crunch, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you all. Great time. Love talking with you.
Thank you, Elaine, for joining us as a guest. Esther and I hope to see you soon. And to all of our viewers, thank you for tuning in today. Please check out our platforms on Instagram, Spotify, iTunes and YouTube. And share, like and subscribe. Super important you do that. Esther and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.